Welcome everyone to the Represent stage for the second day. I'm Adasha Townsend. I'm the content director for Supply Sites Food and Beverage Insider. And we're going to get started in just a few minutes. Okay, now it's time for our first session. Thank you for joining us what should be a dynamic conversation on the Represent stage at Utopia Now. You're about to get a little history lesson about food that you're going to enjoy. During From Legacy to Leadership, Black Culinary History and the Future of CPG, you will get to learn about the deep roots of Black foodways from chefs, entrepreneurs, and nutritionists, and explore strategies to create a more representative and equitable natural and organic products industry. So let's give a round of applause for our four excellent speakers. First, historian, scholar, and food author Adrian Miller, who will serve as moderator. He's going to come up first. He's going to give a short presentation. And then our other speakers, Carl Williams, founder of Uncle Wafey's, Elisa Carmichael, partner of VMG Partners, and Chef Taj, cook of Mrs. Betty's Cooking. So we'll have audience Q&A if there's time, and if not, those panelists are fantastic resources and are all available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you all so much. Come on, Adrian.
Okay. All right. So good to see everyone. Again, I'm Adrian Miller, the Soul Food Scholar. My tagline is dropping knowledge like hot biscuits, so I will endeavor to do that right today. So before we get started, what I'm going to do is give you kind of a history of soul food in about 10 minutes, talk about the current trends, and then I'll bring up my panelists. So let me start by admitting something that's going to immediately lose me all street cred on the subject of soul food. I was born and raised in Denver, Colorado. All right, let me try to win you back. My parents are from the South, all right? My parents are from the South, mom from Chattanooga, Tennessee, dad from Helena, Arkansas. They came to Denver in the 1960s, met there, but they raised me in Black culture and soul food traditions, so that's how I come to this. So, with that, let's start with talking about the term soul food. So a lot of people say soul food emerged as a term in the 1960s with very strong expressions of Black identity, the Black Power movement, Black is beautiful, but the actual earliest joining of the words soul and food in the English language goes back to Shakespeare. So in Shakespeare's first play, The Two Gentlemen of Verona, there's a scene where two women, Julia and Lucetta, are talking about this really sexy guy named Proteus. And Proteus walks by in one scene, and Julia says to Lucetta, "Oh, knowest thou not that his looks are my soul's food? Pity the dearth that I pined in by longing for that food so long a time." All right? Couple of takeaways. First of all, in the late 16th century, not unusual for two girlfriends to get together and describe a guy as yummy. That's the first takeaway. There's a lot of corny jokes. I got to keep it moving. The second thing is Shakespeare playing off the tangible and the intangible. This starts to get to the heart of the soul food concept. But in the English language, soul food for 4 centuries meant doing anything to edify your spiritual life. Going to church, listening to a sermon, studying scripture, singing hymns. Fast forward to the late 1940s, early 1950s, you've got African-American jazz artists who are pretty miffed because white jazz artists are the ones who are getting the most money and the most fame for this musical genre that they felt that they had created. So they decided to take the sound Black to a place where they thought white musicians could not mimic it, and that is the sound of the Black church in the rural South. So in the late 40s and early 1950s, a gospel sound infused jazz emerges, and the musicians describe that as soul and funky. So it was really soul music first, and then soul caught on as a concept in the culture. Soul music, soul brothers, soul food. So we could easily be calling this funky food, but that's not the one that caught on, right? Okay, so when we talk about African heritage cooking in the Americas, we trace our roots to this part of West Africa, and I'm defining West Africa as the band of countries along the western coast of Africa, starting with Senegal in the north, going to Angola in the south. And the typical meal in West Africa is some kind of savory soup, stew, or sauce served alongside or on top of some starch. So there's different starch traditions like rice, cassava, plantains, tropical yams. So that's the basic meal template. So I often get asked, what is the difference between Southern and Soul? Because there's common ingredients, technique, and traditions. The short answer is soul food tastes better. But the longer answer is that soul food it's really in how the cuisine is performed. So soul food is going to be more seasoned, heavy reliance on variety meats. The lines between savory and sweet are more blurred. So for instance, sugar and cornbread, those kind of things are kind of what shows up. So it's really in how the cuisine is performed. All right, let's talk about the current trends in soul food. In addition to the traditional soul food, and let me actually pause and just go through a typical soul food meal. Let me just pause here. So I wrote a book on the history of soul food called Soul Food, The Surprising Story of an American Cuisine, One Plate at a Time, that won the James Beard Award for Outstanding Scholarship and Reference. And the way that, thank you, and the way, yeah, that's good, that deserves some love. And the way that I framed that book is I created a representative soul food meal. I wrote a chapter about every part of the meal and I explained what it is, how it gets on the soul food plate, and what it means for the culture. So I'm going to go through the meal. I'm part of the Black faith tradition, and we have something called call and response. So as I go through the meal, if I mention something you like, you can clap, you can say amen, you can snap your fingers. All right, just give me some feedback. All right, entrees, fried chicken, catfish, chitlins. All right, for the uninitiated, chitlins are pig intestines. Not for everybody, either stewed or fried. So I expected that reaction. All right, side dishes, greens. And in soul food, the popular greens are collard, kale, mustard, turnip, and cabbage. So if you've been introduced to kale in the last 5 to 10 years, welcome to the party, because we've been eating it for about 300. Black-eyed peas, native to West Africa. Also candy jams, which are sweet potatoes, not tropical yams. Mac and cheese. Now, I wasn't going to include mac and cheese in my book because I thought it was way too universal, but so many of my black friends threatened to slap me upside my head that I succumbed to peer pressure and included it in the book. Also wrote a chapter about cornbread, a chapter about hot sauce. I also wrote a chapter about red drink because I believe red Kool-Aid is the official soul food drink. Now, you have to understand, in soul food culture, red is a color and a flavor. So black people don't get caught up in calling things cherry or strawberry or that it has hints of cranberry. It's just red. There's a generational shift happening. There's a lot of youngins that like purple and blue. And as I wrote in my book, I do believe the children are our future, that we should teach them well and let them lead the way, but not on Kool-Aid because they're messing it up. Interestingly, though, another thing from West Africa, hibiscus, is becoming a very popular red drink in this country. So if you're familiar with the Caribbean sorrel, you know about that? Yeah, it's a very popular drink. And then I couldn't settle on one dessert, so I wrote about 4. Pound cake, peach cobbler, banana pudding, sweet potato pie. So that's the meal. So that's the traditional meal. So let's talk about the trends. So one is down home healthy. And the idea is you take the traditional foods, but you take out the salt, the fat, and the sugar. I know, it's traumatic, but that's a trend. So this is a dish that's in my book. It's called Creole broiled catfish. So instead of frying the catfish, what you do is just rub it in olive oil, put on your favorite Creole seasoning, broil it for about 5 to 7 minutes till it's just opaque, and then you have it. People love this. This is one of my most popular recipes. Let me pause and give a public service announcement. This recipe is from an ex-girlfriend, and the people at Newtopia, they care about your mind, your body, and your soul, right? And your love life. So here's the advice. If you are in a relationship with somebody who is a good cook, do what you can to stay with that person. But if you notice that things are getting rocky, I can tell you from personal experience, it's a lot easier to get recipes before you break up. All right. Another thing is upscale soul food. So this is going the other direction. So this is an emphasis on presentation, heirloom vegetables, heritage meats, and then you can charge a lot of money for that, and using exotic spices and other things. But I got to tell you, the most energy and creativity that I'm seeing right now in the soul food space is vegan. Now, you may think this is an oxymoron, but actually, if you go back to what enslaved Africans were actually eating, and if you go back to West Africa, it's very close to what we call vegan today. So this is not a departure from traditional soul food. This is more of a homecoming. This is a place called Solely Vegan in Oakland, California. Moving from left to right, you've got southern fried tofu, expertly fried. Then you've got vegan mac and cheese made with almond milk and vegan collard greens. Wonderful. If you know what you're doing with spices, you don't need meat to flavor it, and then a cayenne pepper lemonade. Another trend that we're seeing is fusion. So mixing soul food with other ethnic traditions. So, for instance, now don't get mad at me because this is what the guy calls himself. There's a chef in Atlanta who calls himself the Blaxican, and he's doing Afro-Latino soul food. So he's got collard green quesadillas, for example. Another thing you're seeing with soul food in Asian is the soul roll. So imagine a wonton wrapper filled with soul food that you wrap up, seal, and deep fry. And that's a soul food egg roll, soul roll. So you're seeing that a lot. And then I'll end by talking about the prospect of soul food in space. You may not know this, but there are people living on a volcano in Hawaii for about 6 months at a time, and what they're trying to do is simulate what a peopled mission to Mars might look like, because the soil on this volcano is very similar to the soil on Mars. So they're figuring out what they can grow. They're experimenting with sweet potatoes, hibiscus, okra, and all of these things. They live in this module for 6 months. When they leave, they have to wear a spacesuit and everything, because again, you're trying to simulate what it would be like on Mars. So I went to Johnson Space Center and talked to them about the prospects of soul food. And Johnson Space Center is where they do a lot of the food testing. And it was amazing just to understand what they're doing. So the journey to Mars is going to take 12 to 18 months one way just to get there. And so they could not put all the food that they need on the spaceship here on Earth because it would be too heavy to escape Earth's gravitational pull. So they have to figure out what they can grow along the way. Greens, sweet potatoes, okra. They're looking at a lot of soul foods. Now, I did talk to them about certain soul food items, and I found out there were 2 non-starters when it comes to soul food in space. The first one is cornbread. Does anybody know why cornbread would be a non-starter in space? Because it crumbles, right? So in a zero gravity environment, your spaceship would be straight nasty because you would have crumbs everywhere. The second non-starter is chitlins because you can't roll down the window in space. Now, before we go to our presentation, just talking about some of the vital statistics in this industry. Thanks for laughing at that joke. I work hard on these. So this is from the McKinsey Institute for Black Economic Mobility. So this is what's at stake. $340 billion over the next few years in this market. And what you're seeing from black consumers is that they want culturally relevant and convenient products. They want to facilitate healthy habits. They want to demonstrate a good value for the price, and they want to experience new foods. So this is a representation of that graphically as well. And you can see how African Americans are the dark bar on top. And you can see, as compared to their peers, tracking those things that they're saying they want this from the people that are providing these CPGs. So that's what's at stake, $340 billion, and you've got African Americans telling you what they want. So now the question is, are we going to meet that challenge? Now with that, I'd like to invite up my co-panelists, if you all would come to the stage. Thank you. Testing. Okay. Why don't we just have you quickly introduce yourselves, and we'll just come down the line, so please start.
Hello, I'm Elisa Carmichael. I'm a partner at VMG Partners. We've recently launched an initiative called the Parity Collective, which is also focused on funding early stage founders of color in the CPG space.
Tajai Cook, Chef Taj, around Denver, Colorado. Owner of Miss Betty's Cookin', Supper Club, Matt's Given, chef of World Central Kitchen, Salvation Army. We are heavily involved, and that's my amazing wife over there, by the way.
Carl Franz Williams. I am the founder and CEO of Uncle Waithley's Beverage Company. It's my bio right there. I didn't bring my wife. I wasn't as smart as you were. So we are a line of Caribbean flavored, essentially RTDs that are based on a ginger base. So like using ginger beer as a foundation to really express these flavors through the lens of a bartender. I also own a few cocktail bars in New York City and Connecticut. So if you're around, Anchor Spa and 67 Orange Street.
All right, great. So thank you so much. So let's just go back down the line again. Tell us, how can retailers plug into the work that you're doing? How can they be supportive? with what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, so we are investors, right? So we're investing in brands. I think the biggest thing is having an openness to brands that are bringing something new to the table, especially with early stage businesses, thinking about ways to give them opportunities to amplify what they're doing, because it can be really expensive to do so. And so ultimately partnering closely with the brands and ensuring that they just have the opportunity to tell their story in a way that is authentic and genuine to what they're doing.
So you mentioned cost. Are there other barriers in terms of getting, for people to bring their stuff to market? Is it really cost, or are there other ones that you identify?
I mean, for sure. there are definitely others. I think cost is the one that comes to mind most often. There's an access question, right? How do you get in touch with the right person at the right organization and get the opportunity to pitch or tell your story? A lot of people have a network that allows them to do that easier than others. And so if you're building something that is new and fresh and you don't have that network, it can be really hard to get the opportunity to tell your story. I think making sure you have the right supply chain and all the things behind the scenes so that you can be on a shelf and stay on a shelf and have the inventory to meet the needs can be challenging, especially as you think about forecasting and planning, especially if you're a new brand, right? It may not be totally clear how much inventory you need, and maybe the retailer's giving you the right number, maybe they're not. So those sorts of things can be different challenges that brands have to overcome.
Okay. What about you, Chef Chaj?
Well, I was listening to what you were saying, Alyssa, and coincidentally, we are currently working with a lot more brands, stepping out of the chef role and utilizing the resources that we've developed over these years. There's a lot of underrepresented brands out there that don't have the proper resources like others. For example, myself, I don't consider myself on the level of some other chefs, let's make it clear. But at the same time, the resources that I've developed and received over the years, we've nurtured these relationships in ways that we can curate it for others, basically you could say. But I fully agree. There's just a lot. There's a lot out there that needs to be attended to. And for me personally speaking, though, there's different avenues and ways to address this.
How about you, Carl? What about you? How can people plug into your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think retail is in some ways a last frontier as far as this goes. So the number one restaurant in New York City right now is Tatiana, Afro-Caribbean cuisine, right? We have Nina Compton's Compere Lapine in New Orleans. James Beard winning multiple times. So you have this. There's J.J. Johnson just opened a restaurant in Ann Arbor, Ann Arbor, Michigan, that he's doing. So there's all these sort of like African American or Afro-Caribbean cuisine restaurants that are crushing it, right? So there's no question. And when we talk about crushing, you can't be the number one restaurant in New York City and not be diverse. Not to be broadly relevant, right? So there really shouldn't be a question. Although the fact that we're having this panel means that there is a question about whether it makes sense for the food to be there. It does make sense. The food's amazing. And so retail is sort of that next frontier where you kind of come from the kitchen and get in there. And, I did mention, so my Whole Foods buyer is sitting here, and you talked about what does it take from retailers in terms of making this. It's actually that level of support. And so I didn't know she was going to be here, and I'm sorry if I'm focusing all this attention on you, but I think it's really amazing when you talk about a retailer that's willing to put that much care in, that we have a whole room full of opportunities, and she's here to hear me talk to you all, right? And so I do think that there's for retailers, one is recognition that there's an opportunity there, that those products are going to do well. Obviously, she's here because the product also does well on shelf, right? So it's really about retailers taking that step and recognizing the opportunity.
So you're in the beverage space. So what trends are you seeing, and then what should there be on the shelves that represent kind of Black contribution?
And I think this sort of goes across the board. Heritage brands matter. Consumers are very interested in the story. They want to know, where did that brand come from? Who's behind it? Why should I care? And so brands that sort of are willing to tell their story and connect to something. And so, it's what you just talked about. There's a rich history there for African American food and drink that telling that story is a big part of what I think brings consumers in.
I kind of wanted to piggyback on that. Right now, as a chef, you're having a lot more questions from the events that we're having and the consumers that we're being fed. It's people want to know where their food is coming from. They have a lot more questions, and even diving into red drink. The term red drink, it comes from Africa. It comes from Cebolo. It comes from sorrel. There's roots to all of this. So right now, there's a lot more questions that are being answered and the questions that are being asked. And I'm honestly enjoying all of it, to be quite honest with you. But I piggyback on everything that he's saying right now, as well as Alyssa. It's, for me personally speaking, it's a learning experience. And a potato don't come out of a brown paper bag. So for me personally speaking, you want to know where it comes from. And not to point out my chef in the crowd, but that's Chef Daniel Asher right there. That's literally my mentor in this game, one of. And the things that we've learned, there's always education to be passed on. That's literally what's going on right now throughout this consumer game.
So I know this is your first time on a panel, but when you're going to break news, you should let the moderator know that potatoes don't come out of a paper bag. Oh, okay, all right. I'm just saying, just to help you out. All right, could you tell us a little bit about the trends that we're seeing in CPG towards global flavors and the diversification of food? Do you think Africa is well represented? And if not, what are the opportunities?
Yeah, so I think everyone is talking about global flavors, which is really exciting, right? Because it speaks to what you mentioned in your presentation. There's a real interest in unique and different flavors and where they come from, which is great. I think for a lot of retailers right now, that is really Asian flavors and flavors from Latin America, South America, Mexico. And so it's not really speaking to African flavors or African American flavors, a soul food angle, and so there's a big opportunity. I think to some of the things you talked about beforehand, a lot of times people misassociate soul food with a lack of health, right? And so I think that creates a really interesting dynamic that puts it at a little bit of a disadvantage. But there's an exciting movement and shift as people kind of think about their health in general and think about how to make products better, that creates additional opportunities. Again, I think that it has to do with retailers, consumers kind of shifting their mindset from what they may have historically thought that they knew about soul food, and really kind of delve into the origins and kind of the deeper history that's there.
So how can Black entrepreneurs get into that conversation about shelf space? Because that's a lot about what this is about, right? So how can they get into that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's an access question, but I think you got to take things into your own hands, right? Social media is a powerful tool, and I think that there are a lot of consumers who want to support brands that maybe don't have the same level of access. A lot of times, whether the retailer is excited or not, they're going to look at what's happening from a performance perspective. That is going to play into the conversation. So how can you show that there's demand for the product from a performance perspective, even if you're not on shelf? That matters.
So we as consumers, we have to show up when these things get on the shelves, right? To make that business case.
Absolutely,
right.
Absolutely. I think a lot of times brands get a chance at a retailer and they get that one shot, right? Maybe it's regional and I get that one shot. Well, whatever happens on that shelf is going to dictate the path forward in a lot of instances. And so you really want to show that you can turn quickly, and that's consumers being willing to try.
Yeah. So this is for, you go ahead.
I was just going to say on that one point that does irk me a little bit, the idea that, okay, there's one chance and then that sort of defines everybody. Like that's, where else does it work that way?
Right.
Like what, a friend of mine has this product called Funky Mellow. What Funky Mellow is doing is completely different from what someone else is doing. That shouldn't matter at all. Like, it really should be a use case. Like, let me understand what this brand is. Let me actually pay attention to what the entrepreneur is telling me. It's not the outside that defines what this product actually is, it's what I'm actually making. So it's being open to and allowing for the conversation, leaving your biases at the door, and sort of, as a retailer, being willing to listen, as a buyer, being willing to listen and hear out the story, and then look at how that sort of is differentiated and can stand out on shelf.
Did you have
I'm just sitting here listening, and as someone right now who we're trying to develop our own, grow our brand. So we have a curry spice within our family. My grandmother comes from Bangladesh. Bangladesh before they seceded from India, and then she moved to the southern tip of India, which is Kerala, and after Kerala they moved to Jamaica. So we have a very aromatic curry spice within our family, and over the years we've gone through packaging, we've gone through numerous options, and it's something that we're still learning right now. But for me personally speaking, it's as a brand that is out there, give someone a chance. Because for me personally speaking, we're representing a lot of other brands as we speak as right now. And we were just having a conversation about tea leaves just recently. So tea leaves, it's if you have Google, pull out your phone, look up tea leaves, and tell Reese that I sent you by, Chef Taj. They make amazing teas from hibiscus to ginger to caramelized pineapple. Beautiful, but no one knows that they're there. And the conversation that we're having with her right now is that a lot of her customer base are coming in from Breckenridge, are coming in from Aspen, are coming in even from Utah and California. Her customer base within Denver is not really there. So for me personally speaking, you need to give it a chance, get to know it, dive a little bit deeper, and build that community support as well. It's really needed. And that's something that I myself am learning. So yeah.
So Carl, can you just tell us about your journey from entrepreneur to shelf space? Like who brought that into you? And who brought you into that space?
I chuckled a little bit because my journey wasn't like sort of very linear in that regard. I started my career in traditional brand management, so I worked for Procter and Pepsi and brand, and so that story makes perfect sense, right? Someone does that and then they leave and go launch a brand. But in between, I took this I don't know if it says detour, but this path of becoming a mixologist, a bar owner, and so I spent a few years doing that, and our bars developed a great reputation. We were able to, it was literally a career restart in a sense, because here I was, this established brand manager, and now I'm bar backing, right? Like I'm learning how to make drinks from the very beginning and the ground up. Now I don't know if I'd tell I have two young boys. I would tell my son that that's the right path, because there's so much like I'd already established, but it did turn me into an artisan as well as a business person, right? And that kind of blend is what Uncle Whately's is, and it's sort of full circle for us. But honestly, we had some good relationships. Our first customer outside of our own bars was Whole Foods, and they took a shot on us through their local program. We came into one store. That one store, we outperformed every ginger beer in the store by 10x. And so they tried us out in a few other stores that weren't in Harlem, so in other neighborhoods, and we continued to crush it, and then we grew from there. But I think a lot of it had to do with just sort of having really good fundamentals around understanding what we wanted to do, and in other words, branding, like what the brand was, what the soul of the idea was. And so having a good idea there, but also being willing to sort of bend that as necessary without losing the core of the idea. So that it's pivoting, but it's not like making a direct right turn. It's being able to adjust your path as you sort of learn and bring information in. So I think that's what's worked for us.
All right, we're about to take audience questions, so get your questions ready. Why don't we just go down the line? Tell us any recommendations you have for people in the CPG space, how they can help with Black representation. Do you have any tangible takeaways?
Yeah, I think one of the things, as we've talked about retailers, not every retailer is created for discovery, especially when you think about a grocery store. There's so many brands. That off-shelf presence and opportunity often is reserved for the bigger brands that can afford to pay for that space. Figuring out how to create opportunities for smaller brands to occupy some of those spaces is really important, because that's when people are discovering products. It's really hard to think that a brand is going to come into a retailer that has thousands of brands sit on a shelf and that people are just going to discover it every day. And so there's an element, and it's nuanced, but finding spaces for people to share their story that maybe not in the aisle where the brand is going to sit day to day.
So there's a grocery store, Pacific Ocean. They recently were purchased out by, I think, GW Supermarket, if I remember correctly. Whenever you go there, and as a Jamaican, they have one aisle for us Jamaicans. You go there and you can find certain products on certain shelves. As a Jamaican in America, for me personally speaking, is understanding that people are asking a lot more questions and really finding the products out there that really speaks to individuals, and taking a chance. Because for me, there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of history, there's a lot of connections, and people fear what they don't understand. I think that's really what it is. So it's really giving each opportunity and each person and consumer an opportunity to understand this product and allow it to grow. So,
yeah, and I think there on a few different levels, the pathway to being on shelf and to success in retail, there's opportunities on a few different areas. So the first is, and I guess this is Alyssa's sort of wheelhouse, is capital, right? Like capital for early stage brands. And I think I can't overemphasize why that matters. There is a household wealth gap that persists. The pandemic did a number in terms of overall wealth increased, and for African Americans as well, it went up about 50,000. The wealth gap also went up about 50,000, and so the wealth gap is now the largest it's ever been in terms of household wealth for African Americans versus the average white family. So the idea of being able to bootstrap your company has a lot to do with being able to take generally family wealth or savings and use that. But if that doesn't exist, how do you get there? So, having access to the capital for those very early stage is one thing. The skills are there. We've, as a community, have always been, because of limited resources, you're forced to hustle, right? You have to make things happen. You talk about one of the biggest factors when it comes to capital is sort of, how efficiently are you using the allocated capital that you get? Well, if you're someone who's worked throughout your career and through your life with nothing, a little bit of something is a lot more, than you had. And so that idea of learning how to work with capital is already there. That's like a built-in skill that you're going to find with a lot of African American entrepreneurs. And so there are data that shows that when African American entrepreneurs do get funding, that the results in terms of the businesses are at parity to better. And so I don't think we showed that stat, but that stat is there as well. And so money side, the makers are there. One of the things that also happens in our community is that there's this idea of the accelerator. And there's a million accelerators out there. And I can't tell you that there's a venture-funded black CPG entrepreneur who's not over-accelerated, meaning that they've gone to every single accelerator like 5 times over, right? So, but I say that to say, like, there's also an opportunity there from the entrepreneur standpoint to seek out these accelerators, and they become sort of, I wish it wasn't necessary, but they're check boxes along the way to say, hey, the skill set is there, and I'm ready for this opportunity. And then on the retail side of it, we talked about it already. It's giving that maker a chance, that entrepreneur a chance, and then having that entrepreneur, as you said, being prepared with what am I doing to drive consumer pull if I don't have a large marketing budget. So,
do we have any questions from the audience? Anybody? Yes. Do you want to come up? Oh, yep, we got a mic.
Hi, this was a really great panel. Thank you for all your insights. Kind of like what Alyssa was saying, there's this hunger for global flavors, but not soul food necessarily, African food. I want to know what you all think could be done to get that education out there. I know the chef was talking about people asking questions. How can we make soul food a phenomenon at a CPG level where people all over are very aware of it? Do we need to have Beyonce say, look at my soul food chef, here's on the menu, and here's some brands that offer something similar? Like, what do we need to do to make soul food and African food at the same level of interest as Asian foods, for example?
No, I think you hit it right on the mark. Because what I tell people is, if you look at Black culture, almost every aspect of it has gone global. The way we talk, dress, entertain, play sports, all of that except our food. And it's because I don't think we have the cultural cheerleaders for our food. So I think we need more people celebrating this food. My feeling. Go ahead. What do you think?
I was just going to say, I was going to talk about like chefs. So we do have that with the chef community, right? Like I mentioned a few of them earlier. Marcus Samuelson, Kwame Onwache, Nina Compton. Like, these are chefs that have broken through. Carla Hall was here earlier today. Like, they've broken through, and they do have the voices, and and they can have. So, I think the voices are there. Now it's just creating that bridge, right? It's creating like, okay, there's on premise, there's the restaurant. Now let's talk about how that applies to CPG. And so if they were all in this room together, I'd be like, okay, let's huddle up. Let's talk about how we put your voices behind some of the products that are out there. I know Marcus was working on something for a while, like a fund that he was working on. Kwame, I think, is about to launch a product. So there are things happening there. I do think that's happening, but it's really about putting the two together and just amplifying the voice.
So when I was hearing that question just now, I was thinking about Chef's Table and the Live in Mole. You have Chef Enrique in Mexico City. That right now, when you think of Mexican cuisine, it makes you go back to just the tortilla. The tortilla was looked down upon. It was considered a street food, just getting tacos on the side of the street. And now, for me, it's one of the most elevated cuisines in the restaurant industry right now that you're seeing being lifted. I want to see our cuisine on that level. You understand? I view Jamaican food as one of the most inclusive cuisines out there in the world. Jamaica, on every dollar bill, on everything that is printed, government scripted, it's out of many, we are one. And when individuals look at me as a Jamaican, as a Rastaman, the first thing they see is an African. But my grandmother comes from Bangladesh. I have a blonde-haired, blue-eyed grandmother that comes from Sweden on my grandfather's side. I'm a very complicated soul. You understand? And for me, that's how our cuisines are. And it's just really giving it an opportunity. Understand that fufu is delicious with oxtail stew. Understand that when you cook down okra with tomatoes and onions and let it caramelize and you eat it with a piece of fried bread, it's probably going to be one of the best things that you have in this world. So it's really just developing your palate and taking risk. That's really how I view it. And then from there you can go. But I've come across an amazing individual that makes sabolo recently, a Ghanaian, beautiful black woman that makes sabolo. Now, sabolo is made out of red dried hibiscus leaves. You can steep it cold, you can boil it hot, cinnamon sticks, allspice berries, and if you have a pineapple wedge or orange skin, toss it in, and a little bit of molasses and a brown sugar. I just dip my finger in, though. That's all right. Forgive me, but that's an inside joke. Don't mind. But with that being said, she's bottling her product. It's starting to get on shelves, and people are starting to take risk, step outside of their comfort zones. So,
I think it's maybe more of a controversial point, but the stat you showed about people wanting unique flavors and all of that, I think they kind of do, right? And I think it moves slower than you'd hope. And so it's really easy to say, okay, consumers, take risks, right? That's, of course, we all want that. On the brand side, I think things that people can think about is how do I create entry products into the brand and into that type of cuisine that allows the consumer to feel comfortable with things that they already know and love and recognize, and then inch them toward things that you look at and say, hey, this is a staple in our community and in this type of cuisine, but may not be a staple in what the consumer you're trying to reach has tasted before. And so when we think about Mexican food, Chinese food, those are staples in the U.S. from a restaurant perspective and just an access perspective. Some of these other communities, it's not so much. And so how can you introduce things like the sweet potato in a way that people are comfortable with? It doesn't mean you're dumbing down, right? That's an important point. Like it's not to like dumb down what you've created, but you have to meet the consumer where they are. Because a lot of times if you don't, you'll be banging your head against the wall saying, why isn't anyone buying this? Like, it's great. Yes, but people are dealing with finite amounts of dollars and ultimately making choices on where to take risks. So that's just...
I'm so feeling what you're saying. That's why I'm working on a chitlin ice cream right now. So,
it's a little too far.
So, if you don't mind, I wanted to jump in real fast.
Yeah.
That's why chefs like us exists, and that's why you have individuals within the community that creates conversations. So when we launched Supper Club in 2020, the dinners that you've been to, Kelly Whitaker, James Beard, newly Michelin star winning chef, gave us Bruto. We revamped Bruto and turned it from a pizza restaurant into being a conversational piece. And it was really working with the farmers from Beverly Grand, from Mo Better Greens, and working with a lot of the smaller purveyors within our community. But we used their products, as well as I'm a from-scratch chef. But we brought people to the table. And for me, that's how you can really create conversations. And we saw sales increase, whether on Beverly's farm, or whether it was a chili crisp oil that we were being used, or this avocado oil over here. So for me personally speaking, it's really implanting conversations and direct conversations, meaningful conversations. That's what's needed. Just to piggyback off of what you were saying.
Yeah, this might be controversial as well, but I'm like, food is food, right? End of the day, food is food. And sometimes I feel like it's just who's talking about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like jerk is on like so many menus. It doesn't matter if it's a black you can go to out here in Denver, I bet you find a restaurant somewhere that has jerk or has curry or something.
Wrong
You know
subject.
what I mean? Like it's food is food. And the problem is that I don't know if the retail community trusts that if I'm talking about my food, that it's good food anymore. If someone else is talking about it, it's all good. Like I saw this, I was at maybe it was Fancy Food about a year ago, and it was a group of entrepreneurs who had just launched a new beverage, and they were all excited. They were like, we had a Jamaican chef in our kitchen, and he used to make this sea moss. And so we're like, we're going to put out a sea moss drink. And none of them were Jamaican or black or anything. And everyone was around the table talking about, I've been making sea moss. I mean, we make sea moss forever. It's just who's talking about it, right? So, that's the problem. The community has to trust that if it's us talking about it, first of all, we're talking about something that we're definitely qualified to talk about. 2, we can make it pretty damn good. And 3, if we're here having the conversation, we've developed the skills to be able to put it out there and to make a great product. And so if I could hammer home any message, it's that, right? I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs who look like me, and they are highly educated, highly skilled, and quite capable. And it's just getting that trust, that going across, get that hurdle of saying, just because I look like this doesn't mean that, my product is any less great.
All right, if we don't have any more questions, why don't we just end with some closing thoughts, about a minute or so. But Chef Taj, I have a question for you. That chili crisp, did you get David Chang's permission to... No, I'm just kidding.
I'm just trying to stay out of that conversation.
All right. Why don't you go ahead and just give us closing thought?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of said it right now. Just like that, at the end of the day, it's just trusting that, and you don't have to trust it. There's enough data behind it. You don't have to just because Carl said that, because this panel talked about it. There's hard data that supports the points that I'm making. It just doesn't happen enough. It's not because the data's not there, right? We look at, investment in so venture investment in CPG brands was at an all-time high in 2021. It got up to about 1.5%, then it dropped to 1% in 2022. Last year it was 0.5%. Why is that happening? Was there lack of performance? No, the performance was there, right? So the issue has nothing to do with performance. It's nothing to do with quality. It has to do with the acceptance of the community, the gatekeepers, about putting these products out there. But the talent, the skills are all there. That being said, I'm at booth 332, so come check us out. Come see our products, and check out Uncle Wade, please.
I guess as a chef out there, I work with a lot of culinary schools. I'm on the board for a majority of them out here. And as a chef, we put ourselves on the plate to be judged every day, every single day. It doesn't matter if it's a plate of fries or, it's ossobuco. It really doesn't matter. But for me personally speaking, I believe in taking risk and giving others an opportunity and really sitting down and bringing people to the table to have a conversation. My drink, sorrel. So when I hear you talk about sorrel, and when I see Cibolo being bottled up and being made, I've been serving sorrel at our dinners now for the past 8 years. And I remembered when individuals try this beautiful red drink that is filled with cinnamon and brown sugar and molasses, and they're wondering how the hell we took a dried red hibiscus flower and made juice out of it. And it's, for me personally speaking, it's allow the questions to be asked and for us to come up with the proper answers and really showcasing what we know. You understand? So go out of your comfort zone. But for me, we can really come up with proper conversation piece within the communities. So yeah.
I think just on a lighter and happy note, when I think about cuisines that have come from Black communities, they're so creative, right? Because a lot of our history was rooted in lack and having to come up with things, right? If you go back to slavery and before that, right? People had to create out of having virtually nothing. And you think about the things that came out of the communities, it's rooted in this hustle and creativity that is really, really beautiful. And ultimately, I think going back to a point that was made, like the more people delve into that history and understand how rich that is, there's so many different ways you could take that just in terms of brands and food, and allowing people to tell that story is really important.
Thank you so much. Let's please show some love for Elisa, Taj, and Carl. Thank you for joining us today. Appreciate you. Blessings.